Daniel Whitmore was a devoted husband, a decorated Navy veteran, and a pillar of his community, but none of it was real. For 40 years, not even his wife Marlene knew she was sleeping beside a man who didn't exist. Daniel Whitmore was the kind of man every neighborhood wanted. In the tree-lined streets of Arlington, Virginia, his presence was reassuring. His home was pristine, his lawn trimmed to perfection, his driveway spotless. He waved to neighbors, never missed a community gathering, and never gave anyone a reason to look too closely. To all who knew him, he was the embodiment of the American dream, a decorated Navy veteran, a loving husband, and a proud father of two grown children who had both gone on to successful careers in different states. His wife Marlene, a retired elementary school teacher, was soft-spoken and kind. Together, they were the picture of quiet stability. People envied them. No one suspected that their life was built on a lie. Daniel's days were unremarkable. He walked every morning at 6 o'clock, a.m. sharp, rain or shine. He had a black coffee at exactly 7:30, followed by a short reading session in his study. Marlene would join him for breakfast, and then they would part ways. She tended to the garden or went to the market, while he would spend hours in the basement, which he claimed was his personal office. No one else ever entered that room. The door stayed locked. Marlene once joked that he kept his spy secrets in there, and Daniel had laughed it off, saying there was nothing interesting down there, just old paperwork. She didn't press. After 40 years of marriage, she trusted him. Behind his calm routine, Daniel was meticulous. He kept dozens of ledgers and files, all organized down to the decimal. His computer had no internet connection, and he never used a smartphone. He paid for most things in cash. While it seemed like he was just old-fashioned, it was actually part of a plan he had been perfecting since 1981. Every movement was calculated. Every transaction was deliberate. Every moment was part of a script. He couldn't afford to slip, not even once. In the evenings, Daniel and Marlene would sit on their porch and talk about their children or reminisce about the past. To her, it was a comforting routine. But to Daniel, it was survival. He couldn't let the mask fall. The man she thought she had married was a carefully constructed persona, one he had inhabited for so long that even he sometimes believed it. But every now and then, something would remind him of who he really was. A headline, a stranger's glance, or a sound he couldn't quite place. And when that happened, he'd retreat into himself. Marlene noticed these moments, but she chalked them up to aging, stress, or old war memories. She never suspected anything deeper. The cracks, however, had started to form. A month earlier, Marlene had received a strange phone call. A man asked for David, then hung up without another word. She told Daniel, who brushed it off as a telemarketing error. But that night, he didn't sleep. He paced the bedroom, stared out the window, and at one point, went down to the basement and stayed there for hours. The next morning, he resumed his routine as if nothing had happened. Marlene decided not to bring it up again. That same week, Daniel began acting more cautious. He started checking the locks multiple times a day, closing the curtains earlier than usual, and asking Marlene strange questions like whether she noticed any new cars parked on the street. She laughed it off the first time, but when it kept happening, she began to wonder. He had never been paranoid before. He was always calm, always composed. Something had changed. Despite the subtle changes, life continued. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner and a few cards from their kids. There were no big parties, no celebrations. Daniel didn't want attention, and Marlene had grown used to a quiet life. The world saw a couple enjoying their golden years in peace. But beneath that facade, a storm was brewing. In a government office hundreds of miles away, a name long buried in the FBI archives resurfaced. A routine system audit cross-referenced facial recognition scans from DMV records across the country. A match had been made. An old case file from 1981 linked to a fugitive named David Harland. The image associated with the record bore an eerie resemblance to Daniel Whitmore that a low-level analyst flagged the result for review, not knowing that it would unravel one of the longest, most well-crafted deceptions the FBI had ever seen. The man known as Daniel Whitmore wasn't who he claimed to be. He had spent the last 40 years living a life that was never his to begin with. And now, the truth was beginning to surface in a quiet office within FBI headquarters. Agent Lisa Carmichael sifted through digital archives on what she thought would be her final month on the job. With retirement looming, her duties had become more administrative, reviewing flagged cases from automated database audits. She never expected anything significant to surface. But one name, David Harland, froze her in place. A long-dormant case, once active in the early 1980s, had been flagged by the system due to a match from a Virginia DMV renewal photo. It wasn't just a close resemblance. The facial recognition algorithm reported a 98.6% match. The current identity, Daniel Whitmore. Lisa didn't recognize the name immediately, but when she opened the Harland file, a wave of memories came flooding back. Harland was once on the FBI's most wanted list, a con man, financial criminal, and suspected murderer who had disappeared in 1983 without a trace. He had defrauded multiple investors out of millions, faked his own death in a boating accident, and was believed to have killed a federal witness before vanishing. His face had appeared on wanted posters, newspapers, and even an early episode of America's Most Wanted. Then the trail went cold. She double-checked the data. Fingerprints taken from Whitmore's old military enlistment records were retrieved and matched against Harland's original prints from an archived arrest in 1979. It was a perfect match. Somehow, David Harland had vanished and reappeared as Daniel Whitmore, a Navy veteran with a seemingly spotless record. What stunned Lisa even more was how well-constructed the lie had been. Daniel had enlisted under a stolen identity in 1984, shortly after Harland's presumed death. He had climbed the ranks, earned medals, and retired honorably. Every record was forged, yet it had all passed scrutiny for decades. He had even collected a military pension under the false identity. Somehow, Harland had managed to slip not just under the radar, but directly through every government system designed to catch fraud. Lisa assembled a team and quietly launched surveillance on Whitmore. They couldn't alert him, not yet. They had to learn more, gather concrete evidence, and understand how he had managed to stay hidden for so long. A few agents were sent to Arlington to conduct neighborhood interviews under the guise of a federal background check for a sensitive government position. Everyone described Daniel the same way. A decent, quiet man who kept to himself, helped elderly neighbors, and had no known enemies. Inside the house, Marlene noticed small shifts. Daniel had become quieter. He spent longer hours in the basement. He began burning old documents in the fireplace, even though it was the middle of spring. She asked once what he was doing, and he simply said he was cleaning out old junk. She accepted it, but unease lingered. Then came the second strange phone call, again asking for someone named David. This time, Marlene didn't tell Daniel. She wanted to see if he would bring it up himself. He didn't. Across town, the FBI team had set up discreet surveillance. Daniel's every movement was now logged. His walks, his drives, the people he spoke to, all tracked. They monitored his mailbox, his garbage, and even a rental storage unit he visited once a week. Inside that unit, agents found nothing incriminating, just furniture, old boxes, and household items. If he had hidden anything, he was far too clever to leave it there. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that he was preparing for something. His routines were still intact, but his behavior was changing. On one occasion, he drove 30 miles out of town and sat in a parking lot for 2 hours without getting out. He didn't use credit cards, never accessed email, and had no online. presence. It was almost as if he knew how to avoid leaving any digital footprint. Then, they saw him withdraw a large amount of cash from 3 different banks over 3 days. When combined, it totaled nearly $50,000. Surveillance footage showed him calm and collected at each location. He used different branches, spaced days apart. To an untrained eye, it wouldn't raise alarm. But to Lisa, it screamed one thing: preparation. He was getting ready to run. The Bureau considered arresting him immediately, but Lisa hesitated. She wanted to see if he would lead them to something bigger, maybe an accomplice or evidence of past crimes never solved. But time was running out. Back at home, Marlene opened a drawer in their bedroom and noticed something was missing: an old photo album from the early years of their marriage. She searched the house, but it was gone. She went down to the basement door and stared at it, still locked. That night, she asked Daniel why he seemed nervous. He smiled, kissed her forehead, and said everything was fine. It was the last time she would see that version of him. The next morning, they were gone. The house was quiet, the bed neatly made, the breakfast dishes untouched. When FBI agents arrived at the Whitmore residence just before 9 a.m., they found nothing unusual from the outside. There was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, no signs of distress. But when they knocked and received no answer, they proceeded with a quiet entry. Under federal authority. Inside, it was as if the couple had simply stepped out, only they hadn't. A full search of the home revealed that clothes, personal items, and even family photos were missing. Not all, but just enough to suggest a deliberate departure. It wasn't rushed. It was planned. Daniel and Marlene Whitmore, or rather, David Harland and the woman who had unknowingly built her life with him, had vanished without leaving a single fingerprint of their escape. The surveillance team watching the house had reported Daniel returning home at 7:15 p.m. the night before. Marlene had not left the property for 2 days. No visitors, no calls, no unusual vehicles. And yet now, they were gone. The agents fanned out. Nearby cameras from traffic lights and businesses were scanned. One clip, blurry and dimly lit, showed a man and woman walking 2 blocks away from the house shortly after midnight. The man's gait matched Daniel's, and the woman wore Marlene's favorite beige sweater. They entered a black sedan that had no visible license plates. After that, the trail vanished. The FBI immediately issued a bolo: be on the lookout, and flagged airports, bus stations, and border checkpoints. But nothing turned up. No airline tickets, no cell phone pings, no credit card transactions. Their bank accounts remained untouched. There were no suspicious withdrawals after the initial $50,000 Daniel had taken out the previous week. It was as though they had vanished into the airport. 3 days later, a tip came from a gas station attendant. In rural West Virginia, a black sedan had pulled in, paid in cash, and the man driving seemed to match Daniel's description. Security footage was reviewed. The match was close, but not definitive. The man wore a hat and large sunglasses. He filled a gas can, not the car itself, then drove off without saying a word. Then, silence. For nearly 3 weeks, there were no further leads. Agents searched through every alias ever connected to Harland in the 1980s, revisiting towns where he had previously operated. Lisa Carmichael, now overseeing the manhunt full-time, was growing frustrated. He was always one step ahead. Even now, after 40 years, he moved like a ghost. But a breakthrough came in the most unlikely form: a phone call from a farmer in remote Montana. He had found a black car abandoned near the woods on his property, partially hidden by brush and snow. It matched the description. Local law enforcement cordoned off the scene and called the Bureau. Inside the vehicle was a strange collection of items: a used coffee thermos, a map of Canada, 2 disposable phones, and a large manila envelope labeled simply with the letter M. No blood, no signs of violence, no prints. The VIN number had been filed down, But the Bureau managed to trace the car as one rented under a false identity in Maryland 2 months earlier. What caught Lisa's attention most was the manila envelope. Inside were several fake passports, all with different names and nationalities, each accompanied by expertly forged documents, birth certificates, utility bills, even vaccination records. There was also a photo of Marlene from years ago and a handwritten note that read, "I couldn't let her find out from someone else." DNA swabs taken from the car matched Daniel and Marlene. They had been there, and they had left, but where they went afterward was unclear. Investigators scoured the area for miles with drones and dogs. No footprints, no tire tracks leading away. If they had continued on foot, they'd vanished into unforgiving wilderness. If someone picked them up, they left no trail. Questions swirled inside the Bureau. Did Marlene know the truth by now? Had she gone with him willingly? Or had he forced her, manipulated her once again into complicity? The evidence provided no clear answer. Back in Virginia, neighbors were stunned when the news broke. Journalists descended on the quiet suburban street, baffled by the story. How could someone live among them for 40 years under a stolen identity? How had no one noticed? How had Marlene, intelligent, thoughtful, observant, not seen the truth? Or had she seen it too late? What made it even more disturbing was how clean the escape had been. No mistakes, no noise, no hesitation. Everything suggested a man who had done this before. But this time, it was different. He had someone with him now, someone he had deceived for decades, who may or may not have chosen to disappear by his side. The official manhunt expanded. Interpol was notified. Canadian authorities were placed on alert. But weeks turned into months with no further sightings, no additional clues. Daniel Harland, once again, had disappeared. Only this time he had taken someone else with him. The envelope discovered in the abandoned car marked a turning point in the investigation. Its contents told investigators that Daniel Harland hadn't just run. He had orchestrated a plan that had been in motion for years. Every forged passport, every forged utility bill, every digital breadcrumb meticulously avoided. The note, addressed to M, added another layer of complexity. Had Marlene discovered the truth and chosen to flee with him anyway? Or had the truth shattered her, and Daniel, ever the manipulator, used that moment to bring her deeper into his web? While agents combed the forests and roads of Montana, Lisa Carmichael refocused on the basement room in the Arlington home, the one that had always remained locked. With a search warrant in hand and the Whitmores now considered fugitives, the FBI re-entered the house. They dismantled shelving units, pulled up floorboards, and tapped on the walls for anything that seemed out of place. After 3 hours of combing through layers of dust and perfectly arranged furniture, one of the agents noticed a faint seam in the far wall behind a bookcase. When the hidden panel was pried open, what they found inside stunned them. It wasn't a storage space. It was a vault, small, cold, and meticulously organized. There were 6 briefcases stacked like files, each containing decades of documents. One case held newspaper clippings from the early 1980s, featuring articles on David Harland's fraud investigations. Another contained bank statements from offshore accounts that spanned decades and showed millions of dollars that had passed through anonymous shells and trusts. But the most shocking find was a detailed journal written in Daniel's hand. The journal started in 1984, the year after Harland had faked his death. He had documented everything. The day he chose the Whitmore identity, how he stole the social security number of a boy who died at age 10, how he infiltrated the Navy using counterfeit documents, and how he gradually created an entirely new life. Every few pages were punctuated by notes on behavioral shifts, lies told to neighbors, and how he managed to stay ahead of potential exposure. He detailed how he avoided facial recognition by renewing documents early, how he maintained a low online presence, and how he had changed his physical appearance slowly over time to avoid suspicion. Then, about halfway through the journal, the tone shifted. Entries began to mention Marlene, how she was the best variable in an otherwise volatile formula. He wrote about their wedding, the birth of their children, and how much harder it became to maintain the lie as time passed. There were pages of contradictions. One moment he expressed love, the next, cold calculations about what to do if she found out. In a chilling passage dated 5 years prior, he wrote, "If the past comes back, she'll either stand with me or break. There is no middle ground." Lisa read the journal for hours, piecing together a man who was equal parts genius and sociopath. He didn't just lie to survive. He constructed an identity so deeply woven into reality that it fooled governments, friends, and even his own wife. The truth was, Daniel never stopped being David Harland. He had just played the role of Daniel for so long that he made the world believe it was true. Meanwhile, the manhunt stretched north. Border control in Canada ramped up patrols, and yet nothing turned up. It was clear that if they had crossed, they had done so through unmonitored terrain. One possibility emerged: a remote border crossing in Glacier National Park, known for its vast, rugged wilderness and limited surveillance. A camera near the trailhead had captured two hikers matching their general descriptions nearly a week before the car was found. Their faces were obscured by hoods and sunglasses, but the timing aligned. Why now? It had been nearly 2 months since their disappearance. The media had picked up the story, calling it the Whitmore illusion. True crime forums speculated on whether Marlene had known all along. Some claimed she was a victim. Others believed she was now complicit. Documentarians requested interviews with neighbors. Old acquaintances from the Navy came forward, shocked that the man they had served with had never existed. But none of the chatter changed the fact that the trail was going cold. The fake identities, the use of cash, and the decades of practice gave Daniel and Marlene an enormous advantage. And now, with the contents of the vault, the FBI had a better understanding of who they were dealing with. But no closer to catching him. One final discovery came when agents found a small flash drive taped beneath a drawer in the desk. Encrypted, heavily protected. After hours of forensic work, they cracked it. It contained scans of even more identities, at least 8, and blueprints of a safe house registered to a fictitious company in Argentina. The timestamp showed the files had last been accessed just 10 days before Daniel vanished. IT was the first real lead in weeks. And if accurate, it meant the couple had a destination in mind all along. But it also meant something more disturbing. Daniel Harland had never stopped planning for escape. Even after 40 years, even after retirement, even after love, he never trusted the lie enough to stop running. The safe house in Argentina marked the final thread the FBI had to pull. Located in Mendoza, a city known for its vineyards and breathtaking views of the Andes, it was registered under the name Aramis Enterprises, a shell company with no real employees or transactions. The property was an unassuming single-level home on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by olive trees and shielded from view by high stone walls. Satellite imagery confirmed someone had been there in recent weeks. The grass inside the perimeter had been recently trimmed, and smoke had been spotted coming from the chimney 2 nights in a row. The Bureau reached out to Argentine authorities, who agreed to conduct a discreet check. By the time they arrived, the house was empty. The inside was spotless. No fingerprints, no personal items, no trace of occupation except for 2 teacups in the sink and a single open book on the nightstand. The Count of Monte Cristo. In the back room, investigators found a locked drawer. Inside it was a slip of paper with just one sentence written on it: "We leave no shadows." Back in Washington, Lisa Carmichael reviewed the evidence for the 100th time. The abandoned car, the forged identities, the journal, the slip of paper. Every piece painted a picture of a man who had turned survival into an art form. Daniel, or rather David, hadn't just disappeared. He had dismantled every bridge behind him. There were no bank accounts to trace, no digital signatures, no contacts, no mistakes. For a man pushing 70, his level of operational precision outmatched most trained fugitives. The investigation officially remained open. But within the Bureau, there was growing consensus that David Harland had done the impossible. He had successfully erased himself. It wasn't just about escaping arrest. It was about erasing the version of himself that once existed, rewriting it so thoroughly that even the government had signed off on the lie. But one question still lingered. What about Marlene? Weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address, no fingerprints, just a plain envelope addressed to Lisa Carmichael. The handwriting was delicate and precise. The note inside was brief but powerful. It read, "You chase a man I knew and loved, but he no longer exists. I made my choice with both eyes open. I've seen the truth, and I still walked beside him. Sometimes love is a lie we agree to live inside. Do not look for us. We are not lost." Lisa read the letter again and again. It didn't give her peace, but it gave her perspective. Marlene had made a choice, whether out of fear, loyalty, or something in between, and now she was unreachable. The letter had been mailed from Chile, suggesting they had already moved beyond Argentina, perhaps deeper into South America, where identities could be bought and questions were few. The media coverage faded, but the legend of Daniel Whitmore, or David Harland, grew online. True crime podcasts speculated endlessly. Some argued Marlene had been brainwashed. Others believed she had always known and played her part in exchange for stability. A few even doubted the FBI's narrative, suggesting it had been an elaborate setup or case of mistaken identity. The FBI never responded to the theories. They had what they needed: hard evidence of fraud, a history of deceit, and confirmation of escape. But they no longer had jurisdiction where it mattered most. Years passed. No sightings were confirmed. Interpol periodically followed up on whispers of Americans fitting their descriptions in places like Uruguay, Paraguay, or southern Chile, but nothing credible ever surfaced. The world moved on. Lisa Carmichael retired. Her final report simply read, "Subject is a master of vanishing. Case remains open, but resolution is unlikely. Subject's skills, foresight, and emotional manipulation extended beyond any previously encountered." By the 5th anniversary of the escape, the Whitmore house had long been sold. The neighbors barely mentioned the story anymore. It became a curiosity, something whispered about during backyard barbecues or referenced when talking about the nice old couple who disappeared. The only reminder was a small plaque left anonymously near the edge of the property's garden one morning. It read, "Nothing is ever as it seems, not even the person sleeping beside you." To this day, the fate of Daniel and Marlene remains unknown. Whether they live in quiet isolation, constantly looking over their shoulders, or whether they found some form of peace in anonymity, no one can say for sure. But one thing is certain: for 40 years, Daniel Harland fooled everyone: his wife, his children, his neighbors, the Navy, and the FBI. And in the end, he didn't just vanish. He proved that sometimes the most dangerous lies are not the ones we tell the world, but the ones we live every day until they become the truth.